it's Emancipation Day. Well, at least the holiday for Emancipation Day. If you're watching this on Monday, the 2nd of August, we in Trinidad have a special link to that Emancipation Day. As I said in my contemplation, we have the special privilege of being the first independent country to make it into a holiday, and we kicked out Columbus Discovery Day to do just that. So I think Trinidad deserves some props for that. We were woke before it was cool to be woke. That was way back in 1985. So we were doing that earlier on up in it. And to commemorate, as it were, the occasion of emancipation, the celebration of freedom, well, I'm talking about some content that I've been seeing recently with an interesting tone to it. Someone sent me a video, a Vice documentary that they did over in Jamaica, where they did a documentary on the cockpit country. For those of us who did a little learning on the cockpit, I remember learning about the cockpit country firstly in geography. Geography was one of my favorite subjects. It's one of the subjects that I actually teach a bit. I like geography. It's interesting to see the unique parts of the earth and how the earth functions, and especially physical geography. That was my love, my first love once, physical geography. And the cockpit country in Jamaica has some very unique features. The karst landscapes, the limestone landscapes that allow for the rolling hills. So it's unique geographically, and it's also unique historically. And the documentary went a bit into that historical uniqueness and spoke about the history of the Moors and the Buccaneers and the people who founded this cockpit country. And they founded it out of resistance from oppression. Slaves resisting oppression, revolting, and went into the cockpit country. And they couldn't be beaten in the cockpit country. Once they were there, the settlers, the colonists tried to beat them, they tried to get them out, and they couldn't get them. So on that history, and that strong history of defending itself against the outside oppressors, the cockpit country now is juxtaposed again into defending itself against some outsiders. This time, the outsiders are miners. Over in Jamaica, Jamaica is well known for their bauxite mines. Bauxite is the raw material from which we get aluminum from, and Jamaica supplies a large amount of it, and they have been doing that for quite some time. It has provided a relatively large amount of resources for the island, but as with many of the resource extraction in many of the poorer countries, the maximum profit doesn't actually go to the country itself, and that's a struggle that you see whenever you see natural resources in a poorer country. The struggle is always where the majority of the profit goes, because oftentimes the poorer country can't even process these raw materials into the more refined materials to be at a point where they get that more money. So they are working with some multinational who would be creaming off the most of the money and give them a little shaking off. But to a poorer country, even the shaking off is tempting, because a shaking off is more than you had before. And I always watch how many environmentalists speak about the environment, and there's sometimes this glorification of the less technologically advanced struggle. So someone has to walk 5 miles to fill some water to drink and to bathe, and there's a kind of glorification of that. But these people don't want to walk 5 miles to drink water and bathe. It would be better if they could have it in their house, just like you do. You go to vacation to somewhere where they aren't as advanced, and you're looking at, oh, look how these people do this. This is the real way humanity should be doing it. And maybe there's a point to that. But if the point you're making is that they should do that and they should continue doing that while you continue living in your excesses, and your excesses are gained because of the abuse of the environment, but you do not want these less technologically advanced nations to do the same abuse that allowed your nation to reach where it reached. So your nation stripped a lot of their natural resources, or a lot of these wealthier nations already stripped the natural resources from their nation. And now they're talking about being environmentally friendly, and the poorer nations who may want to strip some of their resources to get a boost in their production and get a boost in their progress also. So if you think that they shouldn't strip it for the sake of the world, I am of the opinion, I share the view that some of these richer countries that are now so focused on environmentalism and they are sure that these things shouldn't be occurring in these smaller, poorer countries, well then you should pay these countries to keep their resource, because you're saying that we are all connected in the world together, so you want them to keep the resource, to keep the world healthy. Well, pay them to do it. I'm of that opinion, honestly. They should, because they already gained the benefit of the abuse of a lot of these resources. The documentary focuses more from the local side, because the documenter went to Jamaica and did some interviews within the cockpit country from stakeholders who have vested interest in the matter. People who live within the cockpit country. They spoke to a chief from the cockpit. The chief there, if you go and you look at the video, the chief there gave me some Tobagonian populist vibes. If you looked at enough of my content, when I speak of the Tobagonian populace, you may understand or remember who I'm speaking about. And the chief over in Jamaica, one of the chiefs in the youngest chief in cockpit country, he gave some strong vibe of that kind of nature. But the resistance to a lot of this was local, and we're finding more of this now, that more and more within some of these smaller countries, many of the citizens themselves are getting much more environmentally conscious, and the abuse of the resources from within these countries are being criticized more and more heavily as more citizens from within are becoming more aware of the environmental factors. Now, I'm not sure if it was the Vice documentary or the other campaigning around the whole thing, but the region of land that was sectioned off by the government to allow for mining to occur within cockpit country, they cut off a little more of that and returned a little more to the reserves. Now, governments in some of these islands and in some of these poorer countries have themselves in a very ticklish position, because as a government, you would promise things and you would go in there, and nearly every government that goes in on a promise of progress and development. And oftentimes progress and development has some not ideal side effects, especially on the environment. And okay, now we are reaching more and more into places where the technology that we possess can allow us to have some advancement and some progress without necessarily that much negative effect on the environment, but still a lot of it is still required. And for one, oil is still required for most of the advancement and technology that we do. So governments find themselves in a particularly ticklish position. But the government of Jamaica revises the agreement for mining in cockpit country. The government has revised the agreement for mining in the cockpit country, says Minister of Transport and Mining, Honorable Robert Montague. They changed the bounds a little more, but I'm pretty sure that the bounds that they have changed it to would still have protests against it. Because most people, when they think about it, unless they are directly employed in the mining sector or unless they are directly seeing the rewards of it, they're looking and all they are seeing is that their homeland is becoming scarce. Mining, I consider mining in terms of visual effects, mining is worse than even offshore drilling. Offshore drilling, you have some drills in the distance put down there, and you see lights every now and again. It might actually be an interesting sight to see. But mining scars the land, makes the land look hideous. So I'm pretty sure even though they have changed those bounds, they are still going to get some protests on it. But their Minister of Transport and Mining, he also leaned into congratulating the Prime Minister. Our Prime Minister took the bold step to define the cockpit country. No other Prime Minister took that action, he noted. And in fact, I will give him some credit to that, because a lot of times, many officials like to shy away from doing the specifics of a matter. Say how much of this we will do, when we will do it, when we'll stop doing it, how long it would go for. And they oftentimes politicians may not want to define a matter because defining it puts you into a limiting position. Now, you have to work from within the bounds where you have already defined, or you'd have to pretend like you never said it, which isn't actually that difficult for politicians to do either. And it's not only in Jamaica, there's this difficulty, there's this balance that they're trying to strike. Recently, I saw in Bahamas, they were having that discussion because there was some exploratory drilling done in Bahamas back in December. And that one, I don't think I saw anyone really on the favorable side with the oil drilling in Bahamas. I mean, Bahamas, the main thing Bahamas is known for are those beautiful beaches, the tourism, and well, hurricanes. But the tourism factor, can you imagine an oil rig out in the beautiful Bahamas beaches? It really doesn't scream that suitability. So a lot of people protested that, but I guess to their benefit, none of the oil, they didn't find any oil really and truly. As Bahamas offshore project falls flat, oil driller island hubs across Caribbean. Bahamas Petroleum Company, which started oil exploration in Bahamian waters last December despite opposition from environmental groups, has failed to find commercially viable reserves. An exploratory well the company drilled between December 20th and February 7th, about 240 kilometers, 150 miles from the Florida coast, will now be sealed and abandoned. It is not clear if BPC has stopped its drilling activities for good, but activists are calling for a permanent ban on oil drilling in Bahamian waters. BBC said it will now focus its activities on Trinidad and Tobago and Suriname, where heavyweights like ExxonMobil and Total already have a presence. Oil especially is becoming a particularly difficult resource to keep extracting. I understand the environmental arguments for oil, well, against oil. In terms of how you extract it, there are dangers. How you transport it, there are dangers. How you process it, there are dangers. In the downstream working of it in factories, there are dangers. The products that come out of the downstream working of it possess their own dangers and pose their own dangers to people and to the environment. Plastics, which we get from oil for the most part, are one of the chief polluters of our oceans, of not just the oceans, of everywhere. Everywhere you look, especially in Trinidad, nearly everywhere you look in Trinidad, you are going to see some plastics strewn somewhere around the ground. So I understand the difficulty with oil, but that's exactly part of it too. Everywhere you look, you see these plastics. So there's a side where the environmentalists have won the battle against oil, and the general public opinion when you speak about oil and oil exploration and work in the oil sector, lots of people have very negative connotations over it. But that negative connotation, does it come with a lifestyle that moves away from the actual use of the oil products? And are you living that anti-oil reality that you're speaking about? When you say that there should be no more mining, there should be no oil drilling anyway, and every country that is doing oil should be seeking to diversify their economy and come out of the oil sector. Okay, are you doing things in your life to set up, firstly, yourself to live that kind of oil-less life? And what would happen to the nations or the people who really depend on this? As I said earlier in this video, when I see some environmentalists, how they speak about environmental factors and about advancement, I think sometimes they act like they don't understand, or they don't actually understand that these processes that sometimes many times do harm the environment, they aren't in a vacuum, and they are part of sometimes extremely long processes that may span across the entire world. And at some point in time, this process is a key point in feeding someone, or keeping someone alive, or keeping someone heated, or keeping someone fed. And okay, you may be able to speak about injustices that exist in the world that may cause some of these things to happen. But if you stop this for environmental reasons, would this person who was in a position to struggle, would they now be able to thrive from it? That's what I wonder. And in Guyana, for example, where Guyana was known and sometimes even made fun of, if we're being honest, as fellow Caribbean people, Guyana was known for not being particularly strong economically. But since they found that oil in Guyana, Guyana has been finding their legs. Guyanese can now strut about the Caribbean with some more confidence and some more bounce in their step, as it were. But even in Guyana, did you know that there are 2 Guyanese citizens that have literally sued the oil producers on environmental grounds so that they do not extract any oil from Guyana? Guyanese citizens challenged ExxonMobil offshore drilling on climate grounds. Cases first in Caribbean to challenge fossil fuel production on climate and human rights grounds. Guyana's government is being taken to court by 2 citizens seeking an end to offshore drilling by ExxonMobil and other large oil firms that will exacerbate the climate crisis. The case has been filed by Quadad de Freitas, a 21-year-old indigenous tourist guide from the Rupununi region, and Dr. Troy Thomas, a university lecturer and former president of the anti-corruption organization Transparency Institute, Guyana. Now, I'm not surprised about the combination of the two characters there. 21-year-old environmentalist, or well, not environmentalist, he's a guide, but he would be depending on the environment remaining as is to continue making his resources, and a university professor. And many of the time, I have some criticism for university professors. They are very important. They are some of the main sinks of knowledge in the world, but sometimes university professors, because they spent a career of, I have to be careful how I'm saying this, but they say those who cannot do teach. I disagree. Many teachers can do, and teaching is an important profession, but sometimes because of the nature of only speaking about things sometimes in theory and out of the abstract, sometimes professors could have a dreamy way of viewing things. So, but that may be good in some cases. So, a 21-year-old idealistic environmentalist and a professor in Guyana are suing their government to stop this oil production. The discovery of oil and subsequent production sharing agreements with some of the world's largest fossil fuel firms have proved politically explosive in the small South American country, where about 2/5 of the population live below the poverty line of US $5.50 a day. So you have that factor to put into place. The Guyanese citizens already live, well, not all, but there's a large number of them already live in relative poverty. And if this process, if this arrangement, this industry would give these struggling people much needed resources, what is the balance to be struck there in the environment? To sue the government and stop this in Guyana would be literally taking food out of some people's mouths. I understand the environmental arguments, but what about the economical and the human side? They're saying that the climate crisis could stop the entire world and make the entire world crash, but you must understand that when you're talking to someone who is looking at their day-to-day finances, and they're seeing that an oil industry would literally put an extra $100 in my pocket at the end of a week, to tell me about the climate crisis that may or may not be 30 years away becomes a bit more difficult. And it would need a bit more explanation if you're really trying to get this to me. And it wouldn't just need explanation, it would need resources. So I'm of the view most of the environmentalists come from some of these first world nations. So if you want the Bahamas to stop drilling or not to do any more drilling, you want the beautiful Jamaican Cockpit country to remain those untouched, unspoilt rolling hills. You'd love for Guyana to remain Guyana in its true jungle essence. Well, and you're from a first world country, then it may be in your best interest to figure out ways to pay them to remain that way. Whether it be in the free market as a tourist, you come as a tourist into these countries and pay them top dollar to just remain pristine, or you have to understand that that argument comes with an economical balance, the environment and the economy. What do you think? Don't forget to click the like button if you haven't done that yet, and drop a comment and tell me what you think about the balancing of these environmental and economic factors. And I'll see you for the next video at 10 a.m. Possibly 10 a.m.
And you feel the music rising with the time.